So, last year, the Washington Post posted a political quiz from Socialist, which is called Voter Guide. Based on your views, which candidate should you vote for in 2016? Now, the quiz is exactly what you might expect. It gives 12 statements, about a dozen statements, on hot button issues this election cycle, and asks you for your responses to those statements. Now, ranging from completely disagree to completely agree and everything in between. Now, at the time I took the quiz, I had assumed that I'd end up getting matched pretty strongly with Donald Trump. I assumed this because he likes to style himself as a pretty conservative guy. His supporters like to style him as pretty conservative, and they like to style themselves as pretty conservative folks as well. And liberals and Democrats like to style Donald Trump as conservative as well. So it stands to reason that I, a pretty conservative guy, would end up being matched pretty strongly with Donald Trump. Now, I suppose I got my feel of Donald Trump as a pretty conservative guy based on his stances on immigration, which I won't deny are probably the most strong out of any of the Republicans or Democrats running for office today. After all, that's really all you hear about when you hear about Donald Trump, from the media, from people online, from anybody, from Trump supporters themselves. They seem to like to talk about immigration ad nauseum. Now, I won't deny that immigration is an important issue facing America and will have to be addressed by the candidates, as it has, rightly. And I think the case can be made that immigration is the most pressing issue facing America today. But given the fact that you can find perfectly reasonable responses to the immigration question in candidates like Rand Paul or Ted Cruz, I think it's worth investigating what Mr. Trump and all of the other candidates' responses are to the other issues. So after I took the quiz, I got my answers. And given the title of this video, I was pretty damn surprised. Not surprising was the fact that I got most strongly matched with Rand Paul, with 87% similarity with my statements, followed by Ted Cruz with 82% similarity with my statements, followed by all of the other Republicans running, with one notable exception, and then sandwiched between two Democrats, Jim Webb with 50% similarity with my statements and Hillary Clinton with 30% similarity with my statements, is Donald Trump, the good old Trumper with 45% similarity with my statements. So I wondered, how in the hell could this be? Donald Trump, a conservative, sandwiched between two Democrats. How is this possible? And now, here's an aspect of the quiz that I really like. After you get your results, you can click on any candidate, and it shows you issue by issue, statement by statement, how society evaluated the candidates' positions on the issues. And they cite their sources too, and give a little brief blurb about why they came to the conclusion that they did regarding what the candidates' stances are on each statement. It is when I looked into this that I discovered the ugly truth about our cherished American entrepreneur Donald Trump and his tomato red stances on economics issues. And by tomato red, I mean more or less mainstream and not fiscally conservative at all. Now, there's a lot of other bad aspects of Donald Trump and dirt that we can find here. He's pro-affirmative action. He's pro NSA snooping. He's anti-legalization of marijuana. And on top of all that, he's a blatant neocon hawk. But this video is just going to focus on his stances on economics issues. First up, Donald Trump's position on Social Security. The statement is, Social Security should be privatized. Me, completely agree. Donald Trump, completely disagree. And this is from Bloomberg. While speaking at the Iowa Freedom Summit in January 2015, Donald Trump said he would save Social Security. He stated, quote, "We have to make our country rich again so that we can do that. So we can save Social Security. Because I'm not a cutter. I'll probably be the only Republican that doesn't want to cut Social Security. I want to make the country rich so that Social Security can be afforded and Medicare and Medicaid. Get rid of the waste, get rid of the fraud, but you deserve your Social Security, he said. You deserve your Social Security. Now, I think this statement in itself is pretty misleading, so let's analyze it. Now, there's a way that people generally believe that Social Security works, and it's incorrect. And there's a way that Social Security actually works. You see, the way most people believe that Social Security works is they believe that the government sets aside a sock and underwear drawer where they take your money and they set it aside for your own retirement, so that everybody sets aside money for their own retirement. It's just forced savings. But this isn't true at all. The money that is taxed from workers today is being paid out to the retired today, so that it's more or less, you could call it intergenerational theft or a Ponzi scheme. Now, this isn't some controversial theory. This is just a fact. This is how Social Security works. And anybody who's at all familiar with how the Social Security system works will tell you the exact same thing. See, President Roosevelt, when he was designing the Social Security system, intentionally designed it this way. He wanted to leave a legacy by creating a program that would be very politically difficult to get rid of once it was instituted. See, it's so difficult to get rid of Social Security or make any radical changes to how it functions because when you have younger workers paying into the system and their money being paid out to the retirees at the same time, well, then if you stop that flow of funds or fundamentally alter the system in some way, then you end up hanging those younger workers high and dry. They paid into the system, but they won't get any money out. Now, anybody who's at all familiar with the Social Security system will also tell you that that's exactly the direction that the Social Security system is going today. It's headed toward bankruptcy. Pretty soon, there's going to be a last generation of retirees who can be paid out, and beyond that, the system simply won't afford to be able to pay back the workers that paid into the system. So essentially, it's just a question of musical chairs. If we don't reform the system at all, then there will be a generation of workers who paid into the system that won't see any money paid out. Their promise, their guarantee from the federal government will not be honored. Now, this isn't a new problem. People have been talking about the inevitable bankruptcy of Social Security since the 70s. It's just that we've been able to stave off its bankruptcy up until now. And once again, we're faced with the same old difficulty of if we go down the current path, unless we cut benefits or tax more, the Social Security system's not going to be able to pay out all of its obligations. And now Social Security has grown, and combined with Medicaid and Medicare, takes up half of the budget, which is more than the obscene amount that the United States spends on its military every year. And this fact can be found from the Office of Budget Management or the CBO or any other official source. That's a fact as well. And so I think the fact that we've been able to just stave off the bankruptcy of the Social Security system, and the fact that we've had to throw more money at it and bankrupt ourselves and bankrupt our country in the process just shows how inherently inefficient this massive government leviathan of a program really is. And so that's why I support the privatization of Social Security, because it's generally accepted among economists that the market tends to provide goods more efficiently than the government can by force. The market tends to provide a higher quality good at a lower cost due to competition. If you have a monopoly on pensions, and you force everybody to pay into it, that's going to lead to some inefficiency. It's going to be less cost effective in theory. So I believe that, privatization of Social Security, while it's going to probably throw some people under the bus, it's not the same old of kicking the can down the road and growing a bigger and bigger bubble that's going to pop and leave an entire generation robbed blind. And by the way, I really don't see Donald Trump's plan of saving Social Security by making the country rich and having more wealth for the system to draw on is really panning out, because the rest of his policies, I don't see them leading to a richer America. I see them leading toward a more bankrupt America than we have already. Next up, Donald Trump's views on unemployment insurance provided by the government. The statement is, the government should provide stronger financial support to unemployed workers. Me, completely disagree. Donald Trump, neutral. And the source is from Newsmax. Real estate and entertainment mogul Donald Trump said Monday he supported a bipartisan plan to extend unemployment benefits for another 3 months. He said, quote, I sort of like the idea of the 3-month extension that the Republicans and Democrats are trying to get on with, Trump told Fox and Friends. It is a universally accepted maxim among economists that incentives matter. Now, whether this is followed through to its logical conclusions is less universal. But an immediate implication of this idea is that if you tax an activity, you'll end up with less of it. And if you subsidize an activity, you'll end up with more of it. Now, whether you'd like to think of unemployment insurance as a subsidy to unemployment or not is irrelevant, because that's exactly how it functions. Unemployment insurance lessens the consequences of being unemployed. So at the margins, it will tend to create more unemployment. Now, it is important, if we want to think like economists, to consider cases at the margin where policy affects people's decision making, individuals' decision making, or else we could come up with all sorts of exceptions to rules and try to use them to throw out good economic doctrine. And as a result, we wouldn't be able to say anything about economics at all. We can think of plenty of people for whom unemployment insurance wouldn't constitute a substantive disincentive from work, so that they would probably want to end up finding work anyway. But then again, we also have plenty of people who at the margins would be dissuaded from work because they, subsidized by their unemployment insurance, would still have enough wealth to maintain a perfectly acceptable lifestyle to them without having to face the disutility of work. What I'm trying to get at is, if Donald Trump is serious about trying to reduce unemployment, he'd back off from his stance of expanding and extending unemployment insurance. Next up are Donald Trump's views on tax policy. The statement is, the wealthy should be taxed more heavily. Me, completely disagree. Donald Trump, completely agree. This is from Bloomberg. I would take carried interest out, and I would let people making hundreds of millions of dollars a year pay some tax, because right now they are paying very little tax, and I think it's outrageous, Trump said. Quote, I want to lower taxes for the middle class. Prior to the Reagan administration, the top marginal tax rate for the wealthiest Americans was much higher than it is now, some percentage in the 60s or the 70s. But that all changed thanks to the help of an economist by the name of Art Laffer. Now, there's a famous story about Art Laffer that one day in a restaurant or a diner or something, he drew on the back of a napkin a U-shaped curve. And what this was meant to illustrate was that there is a optimal tax rate that is not too low and not too high, where you get the maximum amount of tax revenue out of a population. Now, this was actually revolutionary because prior to then, it had been popularly thought that the higher the tax rate, the greater the tax revenue that you're going to get out of a population. But Art Laffer demonstrated this to be false. Now, if you keep in mind that incentives matter, and that if you tax something, you're going to get less of it, and if you subsidize something, you're going to get more of it, then the reasoning behind it really doesn't seem all that crazy. After all, what would the people who are subject to the top marginal tax rate be doing with all that wealth if you wouldn't tax them? They'd tend to reinvest it into their businesses. They tend to be the entrepreneurial class. They tend to be the ownership class. And therefore, their activities create jobs. So if you take away their wealth, then they can't reinvest into their businesses, creating jobs. Beyond jobs, their activities also create wealth, not only for their employees, but for themselves. And that's what many people consider unsavory. Um, as a result of Art Laffer's theories, Reagan lowered the top marginal tax rate, which admittedly has increased the wealth gap between the rich and the poor, but it has also created more wealth net wise. So it has accomplished its goal of creating more wealth, and has also accomplished its goal of milking more tax revenue from the top marginal tax bracket. I will link to a graphic showing that since the Reagan administration, as the top marginal income tax rate has fallen, the share of income taxes paid by the top 1% has risen alongside of it. I just find it shocking that in this day and age, a supposed conservative like Trump would be spouting the same socialist nonsense of class warfare, the idea that the interests of the classes are inherently antagonistic rather than harmonious, which I think the numbers demonstrate against. They disprove. Finally, we come to Donald Trump's position on government stimulus as a means of recovery. The statement is government stimulus is an effective method for economic recovery. Me completely disagree. Donald Trump tend to agree. This is from Business Insider. Donald Trump was for President Obama's stimulus plan, a government-run stimulus plan. No conservative in America was for it. He was for President Obama's Obamacare. No conservative in America was for that either, he said. So barring the fact that Donald Trump has since come out against Obamacare and wants to repeal it, I don't think it's all that far-fetched to believe that Donald Trump still believes that the stimulus worked, given the fact that he's not shied away from government intervention in other areas of the economy, as we've already seen. And on top of that, he's come out in favor of the bailouts of the auto industry and the banks. There's a lot of information that prices and revenues convey to entrepreneurs who use that information and interpret it to as a basis of their planning and their production activities. When you have a lot of revenue pouring in, which can trace their origins back to the government rather than the consumers, you have a lot of false signals being put out in the market, and the entrepreneurs won't know how to act on them. They'll start producing things that people don't need and they can't afford. And this was the origin of the housing crisis and any other bubble that was created by loose monetary policy and stimulus. I'd strongly encourage anybody who's interested in that idea to go Google Austrian business cycle theory, since you'll find a wealth of information that's far beyond my capabilities of talking about in this video or at all. You'll learn a lot, and you'll learn a lot of interesting things, and I think that economic history will start to make sense to you once you learn about Austrian business cycle theory. So I guess the ultimate conclusion of this video is I don't know why Donald Trump is getting so much attention in the first place. He's definitely not a conservative, despite what everybody says, despite why ultra-conservatives are attracted to this man. I have no idea. He's good on one issue and one issue only. You can find other candidates who are just as good on that issue, even better, even more reasonable on immigration than Donald Trump is. And they're not tomato red socialists like Donald Trump. So I'd really like to know why people are attracted to Donald Trump's ideas and why they're not talking about his economic policy. Economics matters. The wealth of your nation matters. Let's try to pursue sensible policies in the way of economics and not go down this shitty socialist road of Europe and bankruptcy that we are currently headed down today.